Welcome to another Founder Wisdom podcasting edition. We're going to talk about my favorite topic, podcasting. We're also going to talk about authoring and everything in between because we have Holly, should I say, Shannon on the podcast. She has her own business. She's an author of Zero to Podcast. She's also a podcaster. Coffee Culture with Holly Shannon. You can find it under any podcast platforms you listen to. She has a very cool background. She even started in jewelry design. So she's got a very interesting background, and I'm excited to dive into that. If you want to start your own podcast, scale one, or be sponsored by a sponsor for your podcast, you can go to podpire.com. Holly, I am glad to have you on. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and about your businesses?
Thanks, Charles. I'm really happy to be here. So I always joke, I feel like I'm the Swiss Army knife in business and marketing. I sort of come to the table with a variety of experiences in business, most of them entrepreneurial, some corporate. But my background was actually in the event space and hospitality. So I sort of have what I would consider deep roots in that area, building some of the world's largest events. So we will circle into how intimate events could really support a CEO or a founder like yourself and the rest of your listeners who aspire to that. But my background sort of started in there. And then I had a period of time where I went into jewelry design and did that for a period of time and collaborated with different designers in New York City. And that was a whole other step in my career. And then I sort of circled back around into marketing and landed in the audio space. So I've sort of been in many different businesses. I've very excited to share those experiences and how they would benefit a CEO, and definitely about podcasting, which I know you love. So ask away. I'm ready.
You interviewed Seth Godin 3 months ago. How was that?
That was amazing and terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. So I had actually reached out to him 2 years ago. I started the podcast 3 years ago, and I had reached out. I had read his book, This Is Marketing, and I felt that I was on the crux of changing something. And that book completely flipped the axis of the show and made me realize that it wasn't just the original conversation, which is the show started as Culture Factor. So the original conversation was culture eats strategy for breakfast, which is a really famous saying. But then after listening to him, after reading his book, he looked at it as culture is strategy. And so I shifted the show to talk to emerging leaders like your guests. I mean, not just your guests, your listeners, like all the CEOs, founders, startup founders that are looking at shaping their business in a really different way. And that the culture of these businesses is really the strategy of making them hum and sing and do really well. So I reached out to him 2 years ago and said, your book just changed my whole show. I literally rebranded the show at that point. And I invited him on and he said, no. I was so sad. But he was so generous. His response was really great. It wasn't just like, yeah, see you later. It was, I'm just have a really busy schedule right now. I'm rooting for you. It was great. So flash forward a couple more years, and I decided to reach out to him again because as us CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs know, you have to keep trying and you have to ask, just like your cold emails, like you just have to be, you have to persevere. You have to get yourself back out there again. So I reached out and this time he said yes. So I had a terrifying hour with because I didn't want to screw it up. I like idolized him. So anyway, it went really well. I hope that you'll all go listen to it. It's the last episode of the last season, season 5. So it's easy to find. It'll be the first thing that boots up when you follow coffee culture.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I had that experience too with folks that I really idolized. I think Seth is also quite intellectual. So that must have been fun and cool at the same time. Once you've got in your flight, I often find that once you get past the intro, I'm still not sure like how to make my guests comfortable, but once you get past that and you have that momentum, just like anything in life, just like riding a bike or walking my dogs, for example, the rest is easier and smoother sailing. Did you find that? And what tips do you have to make your guests more comfortable and gain early momentum in your own podcasts?
So you have a couple really great questions in there. So I will say that when I started the interview with him, and if you go and you listen or watch it, you'll see that he actually was not warmed up in that he had his business hat on. He's obviously a very seasoned podcaster. He has his own, and he's a seasoned speaker, but he hadn't warmed to me yet. Like he hadn't engaged in the one-on-one yet. He was in business mode. You know, maybe he was busy with something that day, and when he popped on, his head was still there. So I would say it took a solid 10 minutes into our interview for him to warm up. Now, that being said, my advice as a podcaster is you really need to do the research. You really need to know the person that you're interviewing. And a lot of people just don't do the due diligence. You have to go listen to them if they've spoken on other podcasts. You have to listen to them if they have their own podcast. You have to maybe go on their blog, on their website, see their style of writing. You have to follow them on social media and see how they talk, like what their tone is, what the sweet spot is for them, what they really like to talk about, what gets them excited in a great way, and what pushes their buttons. And a lot of people just don't do that part, Charles. Sorry, excuse me. A lot of people, sorry, you're gonna have to edit that. A lot of people just, they just click the screen on, they get the interview and they read the bio and they stop there. And so it took 10 minutes, but I think he recognized that I had done my homework. And by doing the homework, I mean, I read his latest book, which is why we were showed up in the first place. And in his book, I made sure to really not only study it, but to put together questions that I thought would allow us to get intellectually deep and not stay on the surface. I didn't want surface conversation. I didn't want to know, I didn't want to guide him down the road of everything he said in the book. I wanted it to be a thought-provoking interview. And I think I did a great job. I actually feel like I did it because I did all the research. So my advice to people is podcasting is really a great medium, and taking the time to really get to know who you're going to interview will make for a warmer interview.
And you talked about the brain connection. When did you feel in the interview you got down to the heart, and how does one do that?
So, in the case of this particular interview, I had shifted my show, as I mentioned to you. It started off as Culture Factor in season 1. I rebranded as Culture Factor 2.0 in season 2. And then season 3 and 4, I kept it Culture Factor. But what I did is I changed it to Coffee Culture in season 5 to really talk about our innate need for connection and using the coffee meetup in business for networking and dating and whatever else. And one of the keys that I found for warming people up, and this sort of followed the through line for my show, is actually having light conversation to start with. So don't dive in to the nitty gritty. Don't dive into your deep questions right away. especially if you can sense that the person it hasn't loosened up yet. We actually talked about coffee and tea. So the beginning of our podcast really was talking about, does he drink coffee? And how he has this ritual of making coffee for his wife every day, but that he drinks tea. And it doesn't sound like much. And you can certainly decide to edit that out of your podcast in the beginning. But finding some sort of commonality that isn't too serious is always a way to warm up a conversation. And always know, like I said, you could edit it out later if it doesn't fit into the feel of your show, or if you want a tighter show and timing.
Right. Coffee and tea, and I believe mixology is one of the favorite activity of Seth and cooking, I believe, which are very cool passions. They're great openers. So good job on using that. By the way, what are you drinking right now in terms of coffee?
Oh, so I have this really cool place not far from me. And they're at the farmer's market every week. A little shout out to Zeke's Coffee here in DC. And I try all of the different flavors. I'm also a purist. I like French press coffee. So I like that ritual of boiling the water, pouring it over the grounds, always stir everybody, and let it steep for 4 minutes. And then it presses out the perfect cup of coffee for me.
So I'm gonna say a controversial coffee hack here. And so
Oh,
that's
no.
for someone that is lazy and really loves hard black coffee like I do. Sometimes I add MCT oil because I'm a biohacker, but me, I just pour the grain straight up in the cup with very piping hot water, and the grain just goes down naturally. And then I can
Mhm.
drink the thing. And I never get
Okay.
like grains in my mouth that way. But yeah, I'm pretty sure you
Does it sit for a while so that it
well, you
settles?
need to let it sit, and you need to mix it once. Then
Mhm.
the beautiful mousse comes on top, and it's like sipping a very strong espresso. Espresso, I have probably 4 or 5 espresso in there. It's probably 150 milligrams of caffeine, and I'm sensible to caffeine, so I sip it slowly throughout the day. But it's a hard coffee. It's not for everyone.
Yeah, so that's a very dark roast kind of coffee. So I'm about to spin your thought a little bit on that because a lot of people don't realize this, but I learned this along the way. So light roast coffee is actually higher in caffeine
Yeah,
than dark roast.
yeah.
And a lot of people think if they get the darkest, heartiest, big body, full dark roast, it's going to kick their ass just the way they want it to. But it's actually light roast.
Yeah.
When the darker the roast, it burns the caffeine out of it. And so I hate to break the news, everybody. You're probably better off as a mixologist mixing light roast with dark roast so you get the caffeine kick and the dark earthy flavor you're looking for.
Right. And today I'm in Mexico, right? I mixed like two breeds. One is from Chiapas, the other is from Oaxaca, where I am right now. So, and the second one, that lighter one, it has a earthy, almost nutty taste to it. I don't really like it. That's why I mix it with the other darker one, because my taste palette is fancy on that. But yeah, lots of caffeine definitely in there. Now to pick up on what we were saying with the
Mhm.
podcast, you were talking about edits. Me, I flipped the whole podcasting thing on its head. So I'm not about edits, I'm about authenticity. Yet I want to offer the listener the best experience. So how should I go with that?
So I'm actually a lot like you, Charles. I think it's a really good point about authenticity. So I'm glad you brought that up. I like natural language and the back and forth the conversation has. And I actually am not bothered by likes and ums. I think we're all guilty of salt and peppering our conversation with those. And I believe that people uh, are used to hearing it. So like they're not really bothered by it. I'm sure if I was interviewing somebody that did it excessively because they just couldn't get their thoughts out, I would be inclined to do some editing, but it does make the podcast sort of a little like herky jerky. I can't quite explain it, but the tone switches up and down a little funny if you take some of that out. So I, like you, do not edit unless there's like something really egregious, like an emergency vehicle goes by in the back and all you hear are alarms or whatever. Then I'll mark down the point at which that happened so that my editor could tamp down the volume on my side and raise the volume of my interviewee so that we can compensate for that. But I agree with you, Charles. I think you're on the right track there.
You were about to call me Carl. My mom almost named me Carl, by the way, so you'd be forgiven. I think Carl is
But I
better
did
than
call you
Charles.
Charles.
Also, it's like 4 letters, I think, or 5. Yeah, you did. Good job. I edited 3 podcasts on 1,000, and one was really because it was too much fillers. Literally, it was 50% of what the guy said, but it was so good, the content, and the person was like so good that I had to edit it. So yeah, what I did precisely, I exported in Descript.ai, and I told it to remove all the all the and there was a third filler which I forgot, but there was so much fillers that I had to do it. Next question: what do you do to get great guests on board? How do you select and pick your guests, and then how do you reach out to them?
So let me work backwards from there. I'm a cold email girl, just like you. So definitely listen to Charles and everything he has to say about cold emails because he's probably better at it than I am. But so again, it's a lot of due diligence. You have to research. I get hit up daily in my email and in my LinkedIn and in my Instagram, people offering to come on my show. And quite frankly, I don't have any of the people on hardly ever. Maybe 1 or 2 make it past my gate. And it's not because I'm snobbish or anything like that. I just believe in curating a podcast that season to season really speaks to the topic and niche that I have put together. And I want the right people and the right voices coming on. I also want 50% of those voices to be female, and I want them to be very relevant. I get equal parts male and female reaching out to me, and very often they've just written a book or they've decided they want to go on a big branding campaign, and so they decide to use podcasts as a vehicle, which is a great vehicle. We could talk about that. But they reach out and they have nothing to do with what I'm talking about. And I can tell by the way they reach out because it's all about them and not how they would serve my audience. And I could tell that they never even listened to my podcast, even though they typically start their email with, "Hey, been listening to your podcast. I really loved that interview with Seth Godin. Congratulations." Well, anybody could tell that happened. That doesn't tell me that they listened to it or they know anything about the show. And then they go on to say, "Hey, this person wrote a book on why life insurance is the most important thing for your healthcare," or whatever. And I know they haven't done the research because I don't talk about either of those topics. So it's really important for me to hand select. And so I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I read a lot of different newsletters, and I find the people that I think would tell the best story and be a part of my show in a very positive way, because it's really hard to create a community and I don't want to screw it up. So
That's a fine answer right there. Yeah, I really dislike when people are like, "Yeah, I'd be a good guest because I'm looking for media exposure." It's like, yeah, you need to think deeper, dude, or do that. Most of them dudes, it's all about me. Podcasts are not necessarily PR stunts. They're actual ways of connecting with cool people. To me, they're ways of sharing the value, which is why I started this pod. It was just like, let's give back. That was my first innocent hypothesis, naive hypothesis about podcasting, and it turned into a learning tool that, I mean, I don't read books anymore. I just interviewed top CEOs. It also turned into a business. Yeah, I started a podcasting agency. So really, really bullish on podcasts, and not for the PR reasons. I actually think that PR is meant to somewhat disappear. Is this, like, oh, you've been on the cover of Forbes. What does that mean, really? It's still cool. I still want to be on the cover of Forbes, right? But it's not. I would prefer saying that's how many lives I changed, or that's how many clients trust me. That's the cash that I brought back to my clients. And same for podcasting. You need to think of the other. And if you do that for long enough with high quality people, you will receive back. That's like how life works pretty much. Want to ask you the last question, because we're on time. We're probably going to book a round two on this, but how do you actually get to ask great questions? You've said preparation, but I believe it's also a hybrid of being in the moment, listening to the convo, and not breaking the flow. So how do you ask these great questions?
So that's twofold, actually, because I do the research, because I read the book that, of the person I'm interviewing, or maybe they don't have a book, because I scrape their LinkedIn and I go to their website and I learn about them. I'm able to cull from that questions that I think would be great for my community to hear. That being said, I don't want to break the flow of conversation either. So if you're really paying attention while you're interviewing somebody, you're picking up on threads, which is what happened very often in my interviews. You can hear it even with my one with Seth. I had put together a whole list of questions, but sometimes the conversation went a little left of center, and I didn't want to ignore that. I really wanted to capture the moment of what he or she is thinking about, right? So it requires you to really pay attention. It also requires you to do other kinds of research. Um, I think that's why I personally am good at business strategy, because I read a lot of different newsletters by a lot of different people. So I get different viewpoints, and I listen to the news, and I read a variety of books, and I listen to audiobooks, and I listen to podcasts. So I'm paying attention, and I think that allows me to ask questions that maybe I had already planned on, but probably more often than not, I'm able to divert the conversation in the direction it's taken organically, which happens a lot. I think that just comes with experience, Charles. I'm not saying that somebody, I've had a lot of younger people like yourself interview me that are able to do that. But like yourself, you have done a lot of research, right? You've interviewed a lot of people, you're paying attention, you're listening, you're reading, you're upskilling, you have a growth mindset. So you're able to do that. And so I would say, if you as a business leader really do have a growth mindset, like you don't just say it, you actually walk the talk, and you do all the things to upskill yourself, you learn new things all the time. It allows you to interview and have a very colorful and robust conversation.
There you go. As I tell my guests often, you don't need to prepare that much. You have 50% of it is your momentum from your past, right? If you've already been there, done that, and you have so much traction and momentum behind you, that just showing up, and being yourself will add value to the audience. Obviously, my role as the interviewer is take the audience brain, and know what will be interesting to them. There's a part of that is into me, so it's kind of threefold. Mixing that should make a great interview. Holly, I'm gonna book a round two with you because we didn't have enough time today. But until then, where can people find out more about you?
So my website's pretty easy. It's hollyshannon.com. My show is Coffee Culture, which you can get on everywhere. And my book is also on my podcast if you're interested in learning about starting one, and sort of a do-it-yourself method. And yeah, so hollyshannon.com. That's where I'm at.
There you go. And I am Charles Cormier, your host at founderwisdompodcasts.com. That was Holly Shannon, mesdames et messieurs.